What is up? Hey everyone, Eric Brooker here. I am your host, and welcome to the Counsel Culture podcast. By now, you know what we are all about. For those of you that are new, this is the Leadership and Culture podcast. We are recording in Studio 9 today. Please remember, do me a favor while you're thinking about it right now. Subscribe, rate, and review the show. I will leave it at that, but do us a favor. Give us some feedback. Let us know how we're doing. It also helps others find us in an ever-growing world of podcasts. I'm going to jump right in. Today's guest is one of the most accomplished leaders I've had the privilege of sitting down with, Coach Matt Doherty. Coach Doherty played college basketball. Get this. Coach Doherty played college basketball at the University of North Carolina alongside the Michael Jordan, where they won the 1982 NCAA championship. He went on to serve as head coach at both Notre Dame and North Carolina. And today he's an executive coach, author, and speaker, helping business leaders build championship cultures. In this conversation, we dive into the parallels between basketball and business, how culture can outperform talent, why the best ability is availability, and what it really means to be a transformational leader. And yes, my 9-year-old Ross made me ask the question you're all thinking: is he still friends with Michael Jordan? This episode is full of gold, a few laughs, and plenty of heart. Let's jump right in. This show is dedicated to Coach's journey. This conversation is what we make it. This is Counsel Culture. Coach, welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate being on.
Yeah, listen, it was about 6 months ago that you and I had a brief interaction at the Purpose Summit, and I reached out just a few weeks ago, and I thought, I don't know why you haven't come on the show yet, so I'm excited to have you. We start the show the same way every week. I want to ask you, what are you most grateful for today?
My wife's health. She went to the doctor. She was, concerned about something and, got a thumbs up from the doctor. And, my wife she's good at worrying about other people and talking about other people, but she doesn't talk about herself. And so, you take those things for granted because okay, somebody else has cancer, somebody else is sick, why not us? And knock on wood, we're blessed to have good health. Both my wife, our two children that are in their late 20s, and then our two Westies. So, as you get older, you realize, people talk about health, health when you were younger, and you're like, oh, come on, and when you get older, I'm 63, you're like, okay, yeah, okay. My dad died at 81. I hope I have, at least 17, 18 years to go, maybe more if I take good care of myself and making sure that the quality of life is good. So I think the health, my wife's health, that was what I'm grateful for today.
I appreciate that. I think one of the biggest eye openers for me in this podcast, I started asking that question, give or take maybe 18 months ago. And the most common answer, the thing I feared is people being polite. Oh, grateful to be on your show today. I don't get that, which I'm actually quite grateful for. But the most common answer is somehow health related, a health scare, getting a diagnosis that isn't as concerning as what I thought it was, but it's somehow health related. And I'm fascinated. And maybe to your point, maybe it's the age group of the people that I'm interviewing, but it is fascinating to know that ultimately you're grateful that your wife is still here and healthy.
Well, I didn't say I'm grateful she's here. I'm grateful she's healthy. That's a whole nother podcast. No, I'm kidding. Are we recording?
We'll do that in the 2.0 podcast. All right. I was sitting on the couch last night, laptop in hand, and my 9-year-old son Ross said to me, "Dad, what are you doing?" I said, "I just got to do some finishing touches on preparing for tomorrow's podcast." He said, "Who are you interviewing?" So I went through, like we did in the intro, a little bit of your resume, who you are. And I started with the obvious, which was Coach played college basketball with Michael Jordan. And he immediately replies, "Dad, you got to ask him if he's friends with Michael Jordan." So, out of respect for my 9-year-old, are you friends with Michael
Yes,
Jordan?
yes. We were teammates, played with him for 3 years. His name is on the basketball right up here over my shoulder. That was the 1982 national championship. It's weird. It's a long time ago. So, but yes, we stay in touch, text every so often. I've gone down to his golf course and played at the Grove, played with him. That was about 3 years ago. He's always gracious and, responds quickly. The book over my other shoulder, The Rebound, he wrote the forward for that, and it was very generous forward. And so, yeah, he's a very loyal guy and doesn't forget where he came from and who was with him along the way.
Love it. I know we talked about this before we hit record. I'm going to ask it anyway. And I know there is, as you said, a little bias, but I happen to agree with your bias. Michael or LeBron?
Yeah, I told you that this is like coffee to me, like it gets me going because there is, I believe, no comparison. Um, um, Michael, and I say this, if they were both the same age, let's say they're both 30 and they
Yeah.
were on the same team, who would be the alpha? Who would be the better player? Who would be the star? Who would be the MVP? Who would be the leader? It would be Michael.
Yeah.
When Michael 92, so he was in the NBA so that's 6, 7, 8 years.
Yeah.
And he's on the dream team and he walks in the locker room with, and sits Magic Johnson and Larry Bird. They deferred to him.
Yep.
Michael is the alpha of all alphas, and he is a winner and never lost a finals. LeBron has. Michael didn't go to other teams to get good. He stayed home and helped Chicago win 6 championships, 3 of which after which he retired. Michael's a better scorer. Michael's a better defender. And I think that Michael developed a post game. LeBron hasn't developed a post game, even though he's one of the biggest guys on the court. So, and then Michael had to do it in an era where he physically got beaten up. And LeBron, when he drives to the basket and gets hit, he's like a soccer player. He's looking for the red card. And Michael just picked himself up, went to the foul line, buried the foul shots, and went down on the defensive end. So now, listen, LeBron's obviously a great, great player. But, of all time, I don't even know if I put him second or third. But, the thing I admire about LeBron, through all his success, he's never had any public scrutiny. He's never been
Yep.
in trouble with the law. He's never tainted his name. He's always been, pretty high level in terms of character. And surrounded himself with some good people like Maverick Carter. What they've done is pretty impressive. So, not trying to take anything away from LeBron. I'm just trying to let you know that Michael is here and LeBron is here.
So I know right now, as the podcast is aired, people are listening. My dad has paused the show and he's now calling me to talk to me about how talent is generational. I happen to wholeheartedly agree with you. My dad and I've had this conversation at nauseum. I put Michael as my number one. There's a number of folks that I think could go in that number 2 spot. I was not, as a guy that grew up a Phoenix Suns fan, I was not a Kobe Bryant fan until after he retired and
Yes.
unfortunately passed away.
Yes.
But when you look at his career, and we talked clutch shots, there's a couple people that you want to give the ball to with seconds left on the clock. You give it to Michael. Obviously, Big Shot Bob had a name like that for a reason, and you give it to guys like Kobe. So Kobe's, to me, probably that number two, and then I think we go into the early days of the NBA for guys like Oscar Robertson and Wilt Chamberlain and some of those guys.
Yeah, I mean, Kareem,
Kareem for sure.
when you talk about big shots, like nobody could stop that sky hook.
Yeah.
And the thing is, too, going back to, when LeBron's attacking the basket now, he's attacking Draymond Green as the center, quite often for Golden State at 6'6", where Michael had attacked the basket and you had Tim Duncan, David Robinson, Patrick Ewing. You go down the line with the size, Robert Parrish,
Yeah.
that he would have to Tree Rollins. I'm just thinking about all the
Jeez,
centers.
Tree Rollins. There's an old one.
Yeah, Ralph Sampson, Hakeem Olajuwon. You're going to the rim and you've got to score over a athletic 7-footer who's strong. And if they don't block your shot, they're going to try to put you, into the wood. So that is not there in today's game. And then the hand checking, so it's just it is a different era. But I think if Michael and LeBron were coming into the draft, Michael would be drafted first based on what everyone knows today.
I wholeheartedly agree. I could talk basketball with you for days, and I'm sure there's a ton of follow-up questions that I'll have offline, but I want to jump into your work today. We talked again about your book and some of your work in the intro to the show. You often say culture is king. What does that mean to you, and why do you believe that culture ultimately trumps talent
Yeah.
and systems in an
Yeah.
organization?
Yeah. Thank you. Great question. And I appreciate you doing your homework. I, as a coach, we love to diagram, right? And so Phil Jackson had the triangle offense. I have the organizational triangle. And if you see that, you can see that talent, the organizational triangle is talent, systems, and culture. And the better your systems, the better your culture, the better talent you'll attract, the better the talent will flourish, the better talent you can retain. Every organization is made up of this triangle. I challenge you to think otherwise. And however, we have seen teams, organizations, companies that have great talent and great systems, but a bad culture, and they don't perform well. And on the flip side, we have seen teams and businesses with average talent, average systems, elite culture,
Yep.
and perform at a high level. And, basketball fans, we could say the Detroit Pistons with Rasheed Wallace, they didn't have the most talent. The most talent was the Lakers. They had Karl
Yeah.
Malone, they had Gary Payton, they had Shaq, they had Kobe, most talent. But Detroit had less talent, but had a better culture. And I go back to 1983, NC State in the NCAAs with Jim Valvano. They had one first-round pick. That was Thurl Bailey. He was not a lottery pick. He was not a long-time starter in the NBA. He was a six-man type of player. That was really the only, they had Sidney Lowe, played some in the NBA, long-time coach in the NBA. Their systems were not complicated. Like when Jim Valvano would call play number one, we all knew what play number one was. Number two, we knew what play number two was. And like that was it. I'm joking. So, but they had an elite culture. Those guys loved Valvano. They loved each other and they played unselfish and within their roles. And as a result, they won a national championship. So
So let's dive into
culture is king.
yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I've said the same thing on the show before. Let's talk a little bit more about the organizational triangle. How can leaders assess where their triangle is strong and where things might be collapsing?
Yeah, great question. They could hire me as an executive coach.
Ah, yes.
Boom, boom, boom. So I think that self-assessments, self-scouts, like when I was coaching, we would scout other teams, right? And by the way, business is a contact sport. And there's so many parallels between sports and business. When you read, and you're an author, when you read or write a leadership book, quite often there are sports stories, metaphors woven into the book. Like, we had to huddle up, we had to get the ball across the goal line, we had to prepare a game plan, we defined roles, we had all that stuff. So self scouting, that is a consultant. Like, when I coached, I'd have a scout or a retired coach. I'd say, come watch my team and write up a report. So, like we do preparing for opponents, I wanted to see where are our strengths, where are our weaknesses. So when I was at SMU in Dallas, I was lucky you had the NBA right there. So Del Harris, who's a longtime NBA coach, I'd have him come watch practice, meet with our staff. What could we work on? And he would give me feedback. So I had a coaching client today, people say they want they want feedback. Give me feedback. They don't want it, right? They don't want the truth. So I go back to Jack Nicholson, you can't handle the truth.
For sure.
And I wrote in my book, The 6 No's of Leadership, and call it STEVIT, STEVIT. Got to know yourself, know your team, know your environment, know your vision, know your industry, and know the truth. Good leaders mine for the truth and thank people when they're received the hard truth. So we want people to be coachable. We need to coach people, but are they coachable? Are you coachable? Are you, as a leader, coachable? Are you willing to accept the honest truth? Because if you don't manage the truth will manage you right out the door. So you want that truth to float up quickly. So how do you find out about your talent? You assess it. Outside consultants, actual assessments, performance reviews. What are the metrics they were hired to? What are the metrics of that role? Are they meeting those metrics? Some are easier to find, develop than others, like sales. Okay, you have a quota, you got to meet a number. Are you meeting it? But other things like the soft skills, because most people get hired for hard skills and fired for soft.
Yeah.
So what it goes back, to the culture piece. What are you measuring? Because what gets measured gets managed, right? And so are you measuring things like, are you showing up on time? Are you meeting deadlines? Those are a lot of the soft skills. And then the systems, those things now are so dynamic with AI. That are you incorporating AI? How are your systems? Where are the inefficiencies? And a lot of this is doing debriefs. So I talk a lot lately about the Eisenhower matrix, which is the 4 quadrants. The quadrant 1 is important and urgent. Quadrant 2 is important, not urgent. Quadrant 3 is urgent, not important. Quadrant 4, not important, not urgent. Well, most of us live in quadrant 1, and we brag about it. Like, oh gosh, I had a busy day. I was in meetings. I have 100 emails I need to respond to. And I used to think, wow, that's pretty impressive, like a badge of honor. Now I think, what an idiot. Like, you're not training, you're not delegating, you're not putting systems in place to spend more time in quadrant 2, where good leaders live, because that's where the planning, the relationship development, and driving the culture and casting the vision are for leaders. And so we need to delegate more and put systems in place. So systems, what are systems? I talk a lot about EOS for small to mid-sized businesses, the Entrepreneur's Operating System. I've got that book right here. Traction is a great place to start, or what the heck is EOS? And I'm not an official EOS implementer, but it's there. Why reinvent the wheel? So when I played at North Carolina, we had the Carolina system. When I coached, we had, I used the Carolina system. When I played for coach for Roy Williams, we took the Carolina system to Lawrence, Kansas, and installed it there. It's like a blueprint. It's how you meet, how you grade players, how you grade film, how you substitute, how you act on the bench, how you wear your uniform. how you set up practice, what drills do you run? And so, that's like business in a box. So when you're starting out, what's my vision? What are my core values? What are our 10-year goals? What are our 5, 3, 1 year, 6, 3-month goals? What are our proven practices? So to make yourself really as efficient as possible. And the best way for a leader to find that out seriously is to hire an outside consultant to come in and self-scout with a fresh set of eyes and can ask ignorant questions like, how do you guys meet? Well, that's kind of like, you know, what do you mean? How are we going to meet? Well, we show up with legal pads. Well, is there an agenda? Do you start on time, end on time? If not early, is it the same day and time every week? Do you have the meetings regardless if the leader doesn't is in town or not? Those types. See, I'm a coach, so it's fundamental. It's fundamental. The best ability is availability. Are you showing up to work on time, prepared, with a good attitude?
Yes.
It starts freaking there. And so I've got a 28-year-old and a 20 soon to be 26-year-old daughter, my 28-year-old son. And I'm like, you guys have a tremendous advantage nowadays because your competition is weak.
Are we back to the LeBron and Michael conversation?
Yeah, kind of. Like they don't show up, it's all about wellness and work-life balance. And, then they want the nice car and a nice house. And they realize I spent 10 years more focused on work-life balance. Listen, there's no such thing as work-life balance. You work 8 hours a day. You sleep 8. All right, that's 16. So you got 8 to go, and that might be you eat, you work out, whatever. So there's really it's hard to say a work-life balance. You want to get ahead of the competition, you got to put in the hours. So it's a lot easier today for young people to stand out. I'm like, show up on time, sober, with a good attitude, and
Yes.
you could be a superstar at your company.
It's interesting. I talk about the barrier to entry for someone to stand out in the workplace. I don't ask people to work 10 or 12 hours a day. I ask them if you put 8 hours in each day. But I'm not talking when you go out to lunch with coach, or I'm not talking when you go pick up your dry cleaning or get the haircut in the middle of the day. I'm talking if you just work productive, not busy. You used the word busy earlier, and I definitely think there's a giant difference between the two, which is I think where you were going. If we can get people to work for just 8 hours, they're going to, in short term, show up as a superstar. They're going to hit their quota. They're going to achieve their goals. They're going to be more productive than the other people around them. But you talk a lot about culture. I had an interesting interaction on LinkedIn yesterday, and I think you'll have a similar opinion to me. But leaders often underestimate the cost of a bad culture until it's too late. What are some of the warning signs of a toxic person or a toxic culture? And how can leaders course correct
Yeah.
before it's too late?
Yeah,
Because we've
great
all been there
question.
when it's too late.
Great question. Ooh. A lot of people don't understand how important culture is and how to drive a culture. And I think, unless you've been around it, and I was fortunate to play for Bob McKillop in high school and Dick Zeitler in high school. Bob went on to coach at Davidson, was Steph Curry's coach. I worked for Bob as an assistant coach. I worked for Roy Williams. I was the head coach at Notre Dame, North Carolina, played for Dean Smith. So I was around it. So I took it for granted almost. Like I thought
Mhm.
this is the way it was. And then you realize when you go into a different organization or you talk to somebody else, like I remember, this just jumped in my head. We're playing in the ACC tournament and first round one year. And during pre-warm-ups, we're out there stretching and I knew someone on the other team. And I said, how's it going? He says, oh, I got the car packed. We're going to the beach after the game. I would that never crossed my mind. That would never entered I don't care what the point spread was, right? So how do you see it, right? You have to observe it. You feel it. You see it. You have to be keen to it. What is it? Well, it's people showing up late, people calling in sick. It's eye contact, it's body language. 50% of communication's body language. So it's like when you tell your son, Ross, hey, Ross, you got to make your bed. And he rolls his eyes and does that. He didn't say anything verbally, but he basically said to you that I'm not about that, you know?
Yep.
And so, as opposed to, yeah, Dad, you're right, I'll get on it. Right. So it's body language, it's observable behavior, it's sloppiness in meeting deadlines, typos. If that's important to you, right? It's helping somebody. I worked with somebody a long time ago and I called her Skeets to myself. And you remember Ronaldo Nehemiah, great athlete.
Yep.
He was a track star. And, he'd get in the blocks and he'd be down and have his kick out his leg. This person at 4:59 every day had her backpack on and was in the doorway ready for 5 o'clock to hit. And she was out the door. And I used to, when I had to go to her for help, she would just huff and puff. Like that's a bad culture. That needs to be, taken care of, addressed. So, it's the tough thing about culture is it's not easily measurable, right? How do you measure it? Everybody wants to measure everything, metrics, right? Data. It's a longer life cycle to good or bad culture. It's, turnover. It's surveys. It is revenue ultimately, but it's those things where, other things like sales calls. Well, I can measure that. I need you to make 10 calls next week. Okay. I can measure that. It's quick impact. Culture, it's a slower impact, but it has a longer lasting effect because it is the foundation of your
Yep.
company. And so if you have a culture, then that pyramid is too narrow and it tips over, no
It's
matter how big
interesting.
your systems are.
You were talking about turnover. One of my very first podcasts 5 years ago was with a guy named Bruce Daisley. Bruce was an executive at Twitter and ran the European operation. And he said, I got there, and about 6 months after I got there, every Thursday I would go to the bar nearby the office and we would have sort of farewell drinks for the people that left that week. And he goes, I'm there
Every
about three or
Thursday?
four. Yeah, thank you. And he says, it didn't take me but 4, maybe 5 weeks to realize we're doing this every week. We don't have a huge team in Europe. Why are we losing so many people? And I was grateful that early in my podcast journey, someone at his level could say, hey, I was running a ship and we were running in the wrong direction. I had a guy on LinkedIn yesterday who effectively said, I don't care about culture. I don't care about people. I don't care. Business is about making money. And so I asked him a question. You have a toxic person on your team. That toxic person is a quota bearing sales rep. They're 400% to plan, but they're toxic. They're not serving the company, they're serving themselves. What do you do? And he said, you keep them. They're performing. So I want to ask you, how would you respond to that? And what are the implications of keeping that performer, whether it's someone in finance or sales or marketing or wherever, if they're toxic to the business?
Yeah. I had a friend of mine who had that situation at a large national real estate firm and he fired the person.
Yep.
And the company took it to another level. See, what happens is that person is so toxic that the people around them don't enjoy working there. And so once that person leaves, everyone steps up their game. We see it in athletics all the time. A guy who's a star player, but toxic, gets hurt, cut, whatever, the team steps up because now they're playing for one another. It's a business is a contact sport. So, chemistry, synergy is so important. So if we're working together, you and I, and we like each other, we respect each other, I'm going to help you and you're going to help me. So we'll fill the gaps where I'm have a void in talent, knowledge, whatever, you can fill that gap, vice versa. So 1+1 = 3. And, when you have a 5 fingers working individually, it's pretty weak. You don't punch with an open hand, right? When you have 5 working together as one, it really can deliver an impactful blow, and that's culture. So, yeah, that person would be gone. And the one thing that I say in business, and it's so evident in sports, and this is why I love the parallels. Who is the backup to this salesperson?
Mm.
Like in sports, you are always thinking succession, right? Because the player's going to retire, or in college, especially when I was playing, guys expected to play 3 or 4 years. So you're bringing in freshmen and developing them. So who is the backup? And if you, as a leader, allow that salesperson to be the only one that is having the relationship with the clients, that's your fault. So are you visiting the clients? Are you having this salesperson groom a junior associate to take him or her along for a ride along and to develop a relationship in case that person gets hit by a bus, leaves, or you tell him or her to leave? So you got to build your bench. And some people say, I don't have the cash. I don't have the cash. Okay. All right. All right. Well, good luck. You got to build your bench. You got to develop your bench. And that way you have leverage over that salesperson. So, Coach Smith recruiting me. I was highly recruited. Duke, Virginia, Notre Dame, North Carolina. He comes into my home and he said to me that I'd be lucky to play by the time I'm a junior. And I remember leaning into that. So you recruit to your culture, and you may lose some people, but the people you lose don't fit your culture. And so you'd rather know that up front. And then he always had a way of keeping egos in check and keeping you in check. So because he always had good players. Like I was a freshman, I was a 6 man. I was going to start as a sophomore because we lost 2 wing players in my position who were starters. Well, who did he recruit? Buzz Peterson, who was the state player of the year in North Carolina, and a guy named Mike Jordan. So those guys are coming in, same position as me. We have 3 guys for 2 spots, plus a guy who's in my class. So 4 for 2. I'm like, damn. Okay. So I jokingly say, I look at Michael, I look at Buzz, I look at Michael, I look at Buzz, I look at Michael, and then I say to myself, Buzz, you ain't playing. And but what did that do? It made me step up my game. It made me live the Carolina way, the culture, because if I stepped out of line, either X and O with the systems or the culture, then he could put me on the bench. And the worst thing Coach Smith did to me was in practice. I had Cecil Exum, God rest his soul, his son's Dante, who plays in the NBA.
Oh, yeah.
Cecil was my backup. Cecil was a very good athlete, quick as heck, country strong, and hard to box out. So I missed like 2 or 3 box outs, and Coach Smith blows the whistle and never curses. He goes, Matthew Exum. He's Doherty Exum. He goes like that. That means change jerseys. So Cecil goes to the white team, which is the starters. I go to the blue team, which is the backup. I'm like, dang. And I fought him tooth and nail the rest of practice. That's leverage, right? So what is the leverage that boss has on that star salesman? You can't let that salesman control you. A friend of
But
mine once said, good leadership is manipulation with good intent. Now that sounds kind of bad, but you've got to make sure you are in control of some human nature, human behaviors.
call it what you will. I think it does start with culture. I had a guy, I don't know if you know the name Swen Nader, but
Gosh, heck yeah.
I
Schwinn
had
Nader.
S- I had Swen on the podcast years ago. We talked about Bill Walton. We talked about, he said, for a minute in college we were peers. We were as talented as one another. So, great conversation. He said I was going to be the starter because Bill Walton wouldn't cut his hair. And he said, I started in practice for 2 or 3 days. Bill protested and thought, well, I'm Bill Walton. I'm going to get the starting job. And then that third day of practice, he realized, shoot, I'd better cut my hair. And it's funny. I talked to Bill Walton on the phone for about 15 minutes, I don't know, 2, 3 years ago, I guess. And I said, hey, by the way, Swen Nader says hello. And he goes, oh man, did he ever tell you the time he goes, Eric, he'd have played really great in the NBA and had a better shot than I did if he said it all comes down to culture. It all came down to John Wooden had a way in which everybody needed to conform. And it started with the way you tie your shoes, the way you put your socks on. It starts with the way you look on the court. It's funny because we do so many of these Zoom meetings as business leaders each and every day, and there's very few people that have structure. We used to walk into meetings, Coach, I know you know this. We used to walk into meetings with a printed agenda. Hey, these are the things we agreed to talk about. Is there anything else that's different? Meetings used to start and end on time. I'm militant. Coach, I don't care if you're 5 minutes late, but we're going to be 5 minutes into the meeting because the
That's
meeting
right.
started at 11.
I do that, and you could say that's old school. I want to piggyback. I love that story about Bill Walton. So to add to it, this legend goes, Bill Bill Walton goes up to Coach Wooden before practice, and Coach Wooden's questioning about the hair, as you mentioned, and like he didn't want it touching his ears or the collar. And Bill was like, Coach, this is important to me. My individuality, and this is during like protests and Vietnam and all that. And Coach Wooden was nodding and like, yes, Bill, I understand. I know that's important to you, but we're going to miss you. And Bill said, I got on my 10-speed, drove into Brentwood, got my hair cut, and came back in time for practice. Yeah, that's leverage. If you didn't have Schwinn Nader, would Coach Wooden have been as confident in holding, we joke, we
That's
joked.
that backup that you talked about, though.
Yeah. When we joked at when we got to Davidson College first year, Bob McKillop, Don Hogan, and I were assistants. Don and I both played for Bob. And when Bob coached us in high school at Holy Trinity High School, it was like, all right, shirts tucked in. We all had the same sneakers, socks were the same length, haircuts, the shirts we wore to practice, like he'd get on us. And so we get to Davidson, and Davidson, had several losing records, and we get the job. And we're like, so what's our policy going to be on haircuts, earrings, and hats? And I joke, I said, it depends. It depends on how good he is. If he's really good and he's got an earring and he wears a hat on sideways, we're going to meet him at the airport with a hat on sideways and an earring. And so it goes back to leverage.
Yeah.
It goes back to leverage.
So talk to me. When I did the homework, started prepping, I realized you have recruited and developed not just great talent in basketball, but great talent in basketball and in business. And you've done it at a level that most of us aspire to. I mean, you've got NBA Hall of Famers tied to your coaching career. What are the keys to attracting and retaining that top talent in what seems to be a very competitive environment right now?
Yeah. I like to recruit. I like the sale. I like the competitive nature of it. I liked the connection. I have, I believe, the ability, and it's been brought out in assessments. I'm an assessment junkie, right? So, DISC, Myers Briggs, Culture Index, Predictive Index, I take them all. And, I have the ability to connect quickly, and find commonality, develop trust. And then I think the key is maintaining that trust, right? Um, so, and finding commonality and relate to people within who you are. Don't be a phony. So,
Mhm.
I'm a 63-year-old white guy from Long Island, Irish Catholic, three older sisters, younger brother. I I can't wear that hat on sideways with an earring, but can I relate to that guy? Yes, I can relate to that guy. But wearing a blazer and a button-down shirt, can I relate to that guy? Can I speak his language to a point where I'm developing a trust, I can connect, but I am not going outside the 4-lane highway and losing the integrity of who I am as a person. And I think that like Dean Smith could do that. You talk about politicians that had the ability to do that. They say Bill Clinton was the master at connecting with people. And so, it's the eye contact, it's remembering name. It's really trying to lock in with somebody. And then, one thing I'm proud of, and not a lot of people like it, but I tell the truth, I mean, I'll recruit you and I'll tell you I'm going to push you. And man, I had a player, Billy Thomas, who played at Kansas, and I found him. I was watching film of another player and saw him, and I'm like, wow, this kid can shoot. So I went down to Louisiana, recruited him to Kansas, and Billy wasn't a great ball handler. And practice was over, and Billy goes to the locker room. And I'm like, he's not. He went to the locker room. This guy should be doing ball hand, like the Steph Curry drills. We call those the Pete Maravich drills, right? Because Pete Maravich started those drills. So I'm like, Billy, I went into the locker room in front of his teammates. I said, Billy, get your ass out here. We're working on your ball handling because your ball handling is embarrassing. And he hated it. But you know what? Billy ended up playing in the freaking NBA. And he thanks me today for pushing him. Right. And so as a coach, the definition of a coach, where it came from, and this is something I'm so proud of. If you look it up, the term coach came from Hungary. And there was a town, Coach, spelled like Koech or something like that. And it's where they built horse-drawn carriages that take people from point A to point B.
Yeah.
Fast forward, coach planes, coach on a boat, coach buses. And then it morphed into Oxford University, where professors became titled coach because they took students from their first day through exams. So me as a coach, and I love being called coach, is I take a person from point A to point B, and hopefully a transformational coach. Phil Jackson talked about this. There's transactional coaches and transformational coaches. And at times I've been a transactional coach, and I regret that, like, okay, what can that player do? He can help me win. I can put him in this position, but are you really transforming the person's life? Are you transforming how they think? Or are you just using them for their talent? And so coach, like when you looked at Phil Jackson, he'd give players books. He'd do yoga. He didn't call timeouts at the end of games. He wanted the players to figure it out. He played an offense that had structure but freedom. Everybody who had the ball was a decision maker. And so he was really transformational versus maybe more of a Pat Riley, where he'd raise, play number 3 and they'd run to the spots, and then play number 2 and they'd run to their spots. He really handed over the game and trusted his players to do what they were taught to do. And so the transformational aspect of it, their players I have great relationships with today, and some I don't, but I think that's maybe normal for a lot of people. Some I pushed and they didn't like it. Some I told the truth, they didn't like it. But the ones that did, it's really cool when you get a card or a call or a text or a Facebook direct message, the impact, thanking me for, the impact you make. And that's what a coach wants to do, is impact lives.
I think of an old sales leader early in my career. Oddly, I happen to have lunch with him or dinner scheduled with him for next week in Dallas. And so I'll have that opportunity. And I'm grateful for this conversation, because I don't know that I would have been able to put the right words to it, but he was a transformational leader for me where a lot of my leaders over the years were measuring KPIs and metrics that made it simply transactional. I hit my number. Back to your point, I did the things that were necessary to execute. And that's not, again, to your point, that doesn't make them a bad leader. I was
No.
there to do a transaction. I did the transaction. They coached me accordingly.
So they were maybe more of a manager than a leader.
Yes.
So how do you do it? It takes more time
Yes.
to lead than manage. So it might be, Eric, let's go to lunch. So tell me, how's it going for you? What are your biggest challenges? What do you think you can do to become a better salesperson? What teachings do you like? What could you bring? What are you seeing that maybe we should be doing? What can you commit to over the next 3 months? What support would you need from me? So all I did was ask you questions. You're coming up with
Yeah.
the answers, right? And so I remember when I was a young head coach, if somebody did something wrong, I would get on them and yell at them in front of the team, and it felt good because I was the boss. I was in control. It was feeding my ego. And then I got fired at North Carolina and went on a leadership journey, and I realized the importance of emotional intelligence and core values.
Yeah.
And so I instilled a set of core values, and I tried to manage to them. And mine at the time were RTC, respect, trust, commitment. And I had a player who was missing class at SMU. And instead of yelling at him in front of the team, I had him called up to my office where we had a stone. And on that stone, limestone, was a plate that said RTC, SMU basketball in a year. And I had everyone sign the stone. So it was like an operating agreement. So I brought him in, and who likes being called into the office, right? By their boss. And so I said, he sat down across from me at the conference table. I said, "Did you sign that stone?" He said, "Yes." I asked him what the core values were. He told me respect, trust, commitment. I said, "Well, I hear you're missing class." His head dropped. I said, "Now you're not showing the program respect because we have mandatory class attendance. I thought you were going to class and you're not. And so you broke my trust. And you're obviously not committed to getting a good education." And I just paused. And I said, "If you were me, what would you do?"
Mm.
I went old school on him, right? And he kind of shook his head. And he said, "Well, I guess I suspend me." I said, "Okay, you're suspended." And we walked out the door. And I was like, leadership is a learned behavior. Like I wouldn't have
Yeah.
done that 12 years earlier, And so that's why I'm in the space I am, because I was told I wasn't a good leader when I got let go at North Carolina. I went on this leadership journey and I took a class at Wharton and on emotional intelligence. And in the book I read, which is up there somewhere, Emotional Intelligence, Primal Leadership, The Art of Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. It said leadership is a learned behavior. It was the most exciting thing I ever read. So that was transformational moment. People say, "What's the most exciting, proud moment in your coaching career?" I said, that was the most proud moment, because now he goes to the team in the locker room and they're like, "Hey man, what happened? I heard you're up with coach." He's like, "I don't know. He asked me what the core values were, and I guess I suspended myself." Right?
Yeah.
Versus me being in the huddle before practice and saying, "Hey, you broke rules. Get on the baseline. You're going to run till you puke." And the players will look at me like the jerk. So that was a transformational moment. And I just asked questions. So if I was your sales manager, leader, Eric, let's sit down for 30 minutes. I'll go to your office. I'm going to
Yeah.
sit down. I'm not going to stand above you. Again, body language is 50% of communication. Might cross my legs. Or if I call you into my office, I'm going to have a sitting area, so I'm not behind my desk.
Yes.
Eric, let's talk about this. I think you have great potential. You could be one of the best salespeople in our organization. Tell me what might be getting in the way. Man, how would you respond to that? Right. And so just asking questions, removing obstacles, challenging, okay, getting you to commit to something. I always loved at the beginning of the year, I said, "All right, who here wants to play in the NBA?" And all the players raised their hands. I'm like, "Okay, all right, good. I got you." Gotcha. You know what
But
NBA
with
players do? They work hard.
the right coach, with someone that's really interested in your transformation. I had Walter Bond on the show maybe 2 years ago, and Walter talked about, he said, I wanted to get to the NBA. Part of his miss, and he's very open about it, was he didn't want to play in the NBA. He wanted to make it to the NBA. So he didn't do what was necessary to stay. But his coach told him, as a guy that came off the bench, you're NBA caliber, but you gotta listen to me. You've gotta be coachable. And I think that was his demise. He went on to make the NBA. He had a lot of opportunities to remain in the NBA and didn't keep those. We're coming to the tail end of the show. I've got a couple questions left. I'd be remiss for anybody watching the show if I didn't ask, what's with the shoes on your left shoulder?
Yeah, those shoes were the Converse that we wore. These weren't the actual shoe,
Yeah.
but we wore Converse in the Coach Smith was a Converse guy for most of his career, and we wore those and Converse. We didn't have NIL money back then, so they gave us these shoes and put branded them with our names on the side. I don't know if you can see
I
that.
love it.
And so, yeah, they were the worst shoes I think Converse ever made. They are hard, and you couldn't wear them out. Like I wanted to wear them out, so you'd be on your bike and you drag your feet because you just wanted to wear these things out. They were awful, and I have heel spurs today from these. Like you can't bend them. Like they don't bend. Yeah. So yeah, that's what these shoes are.
I love it. Last question. You've done a lot of interviews over the years. Like, of all the people that I've had on the show, Coach, you've done a lot of pregame, postgame, you've done a lot of podcasts. What's one question you wish people would ask you, but they don't?
Oh yeah, good question. What's the thing you're most proud of?
And how would you answer that?
Well, you got to ask the question first.
Coach, what's the one thing you're most proud of? I love it.
Sobriety. I became sober 34 years ago. I didn't talk about it until about 5 years ago because didn't want it to impact my career.
Yeah.
And everything, my success beyond playing stemmed from sobriety. I drank in college, and then, you get to Wall Street. I'm working on Wall Street, and, it's kind of a way of life. But I really was kind of depressed, not happy that I was identified as a basketball player. And when I lost that, I trying to self medicate, I think, and have the gene, you know, Irish guy has that gene. You have an addictive personality. So, like a friend of mine would say, one's too many and 100's not enough. So I woke up on the porch at the Jersey Shore of a house that I wasn't staying at in like
Mm.
1986, 87, and realized I needed help. And I got counseling, and that led me to AA. And I only went to AA for about a month or two. And I moved down to North Carolina, ended up getting coaching. And I'm really blessed that I could turn that off, that faucet off. And 11 years later, I'm the head coach at Notre Dame. And I married my wife, who wouldn't have married me if I drank alcohol. So from that decision, you see, your life's nothing but a series of decisions and dealing with the consequences. So I made the decision to stop. And as a result, I get married to a beautiful lady and a beautiful person. And I end up being the head coach at Notre Dame. And that doesn't happen if I was still drinking. So I'm most proud of that. And I'm still, I drink non-alcoholic beer now, which I feel like at times am I cheating? But that's the thing I'm most proud of.
Well, you don't know this. We've had this conversation countless times on the show. I lost my sister in law to alcohol addiction about 5 years ago. And it is, I think, and I will get it after this conversation. Someone always reaches out. And I'm grateful that you shared what you did. And I'm grateful for your willingness to be so open about it. because I think there's a lot more people with addictive personalities than we would like to admit. And there's a lot of people that want someone to tell them it's okay to talk about it. And you have done that. So I thank you. As we wrap up the show, where can people find you? Where can people find your work?
Thank you very much. My website is dohertycoaching.com. That's DOHERTY coaching.com. Or they can just email me at Matt, M-A-T-T, at dohertycoaching.com.
All of that will be in the notes. Coach, it was an absolute pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
Tell Ross I said, what's up?
I will. Thank you.
And that MJ is the GOAT.
Thank you for listening to Counsel Culture today. If you liked the show, please consider sharing it with a friend. Please take a moment to rate and review the show. You can always find us on social media, or feel free to email me directly at eb@ericbrooker.com. Leadership is a choice, and culture is contagious. Thank you for listening to today's episode of Counsel Culture.